In 1958, a scientist wanted to answer a question that psychology had been avoiding for decades. Is love actually necessary to survive, or is it just something we made up? To find out, he took infant monkeys away from their mothers. And what happened next would change psychology forever and expose something disturbing about what happens when love is missing. To understand why this experiment mattered, you have to understand what psychologists believed before it. In the mid-20th century, the dominant view of child development was almost mechanical. Behaviorists like John Watson argued that affection between parent and child was, at best, unnecessary, and at worst, actively harmful. Watson himself warned parents against too much hugging and kissing, worried it would create weak, overly dependent adults. The prevailing theory was called cupboard love. The idea was simple. Babies don't love their mothers. They love what their mothers provide: food, warmth, safety. Strip away the milk, and the bond disappears. Love, in this view, was just a byproduct of feeding. A young psychologist named Harry Harlow thought this was wrong. He'd noticed something in his own lab animals. Baby rhesus monkeys seemed to form attachments to soft cloth pads in their cages, even when the pads had nothing to do with food. It was a small observation, but it planted a question that most of the field had never bothered to ask. What if comfort itself was something animals needed, separate from food entirely? To test it, Harlow designed one of the most famous and most controversial experiments in the history of psychology. Harlow separated newborn rhesus monkeys from their real mothers within hours of birth. In their place, he built two artificial mothers. The first was made of bare wire mesh, cold and functional. Attached to it was a bottle, the only source of milk in the cage. The second was covered in soft terry cloth, warm to the touch, but it had no bottle, no food at all. If the old theory was correct, if love really was just about who feeds you, the baby monkeys should have bonded with the wire mother. She was the one with the milk. They didn't. The infant monkeys drank from the wire mother when they were hungry. But the second they were done feeding, they left her immediately and ran to cling to the cloth mother instead. They spent nearly all day pressed against her, only leaving the soft, non-feeding mother for the bare minimum time it took to eat. When Harlow introduced frightening stimuli into the cage, a mechanical toy, a loud noise, the babies didn't run to the mother with the food. They ran to the one that felt like something. The wire mother kept them alive. The cloth mother made them feel safe. For the first time, there was hard experimental proof. Comfort wasn't a side effect of survival, it was its own separate need. And when forced to choose, these infants chose comfort over food. This alone would have been a landmark finding. But Harlow didn't stop there. He wanted to know what happened to a monkey raised with no mother at all. Not wire, not cloth, nothing. The monkeys raised in total isolation didn't just fail to bond, they came apart. They rocked back and forth obsessively. They clutched themselves. Some bit their own arms and legs until they bled. When they were eventually introduced to other monkeys, they didn't know how to interact at all. They either froze in terror or lashed out violently. As adults, many of the females who had been isolated as infants were incapable of normal mating behavior, and some who did become mothers showed no interest in their own offspring. A small number even harmed them. Harlow's most extreme apparatus became known, bluntly, as the Pit of Despair, a small isolation chamber shaped like an inverted pyramid, designed so a monkey placed inside had no way to see out and no way to climb up. Monkeys left in it for even a few weeks emerged permanently changed, withdrawn, fearful, and in many cases unable to recover even years later. It's worth being direct here. By modern ethical standards, this research would never be approved. It's part of why Harlow's work is now taught not just as a landmark study, but as a case study in the ethical limits science eventually had to draw around itself. But the damage documented in these experiments produced something the field couldn't ignore. Love, or its absence, wasn't a soft, unmeasurable feeling. It was a biological need, and its absence caused injuries just as real as hunger or cold. Harlow's findings landed at exactly the right, or wrong, moment. In the 1940s and 50s, it was common practice in hospitals and orphanages to minimize physical contact with infants based on fears about spreading infection and the belief that too much handling would spoil a child. Some institutions left babies in cribs for nearly the entire day, touched only for feeding and changing. Around the same period, researcher René Spitz had already documented something alarming in institutionalized infants who received adequate food and medical care but almost no physical affection, a condition he called hospitalism, marked by severe developmental delays and, in the most extreme cases, death, despite every physical need being met. Harlow's monkeys gave that observation a mechanism. It wasn't a mystery illness. It was the absence of contact itself, acting almost like a nutrient deficiency, except the missing nutrient was touch. Together, this body of research helped end decades of institutional practice almost overnight. Hospitals changed their policies on parental contact. Orphanages restructured around caregiver bonding, what we now call attachment theory, the idea that early emotional bonds shape a child's entire psychological development, owes much of its scientific backing to a wire mother and a cloth mother in a lab in Wisconsin. Here's the part that should unsettle you more than the history lesson. We don't run these experiments on human infants. We don't have to. Natural experiments have already shown us the same thing. Children raised in severely under-resourced orphanages in the decades after World War II, and later documented extensively in Romanian orphanages in the 1990s, showed strikingly similar patterns to Harlow's isolated monkeys, even when every physical need was met. Rocking, self-harm, an inability to form normal attachments later in life. The parallel wasn't subtle, it was almost exact. And it raises an uncomfortable question about the world we've built since. We live in an era of unprecedented physical safety and material comfort. More food security, better health care, safer homes than at almost any point in history. But rates of loneliness and disconnection, especially in young people, have been climbing for years. Harlow's monkeys had every physical need met by the wire mother. It wasn't enough to keep them from falling apart. The uncomfortable question this experiment leaves us with isn't really about monkeys at all. It's about whether we've built a world that's very good at meeting our wire mother needs and much worse at meeting our cloth mother ones. Harry Harlow's experiments are, by any modern standard, hard to watch and harder to justify. But they left behind an answer to a question that psychology had spent decades avoiding. Love isn't a bonus. It isn't sentiment. It's a biological requirement, as real and as necessary as food. The monkeys proved it. The only question left is whether we're still listening.